Hi, my name is Lily and welcome back to my channel and welcome to my worst / most disappointing books of the year. So I read over 130 books in 2022, which means there's going to be a few duds in there. I am actually going to be doing this a little bit differently to how I think some people do this. These aren't the books that I necessarily rated the lowest, but these are the books that I found the most disappointing and the ones that I gave the lowest rating compared to what I was expecting. So most of these I have either already unhauled, or they were library books, or I don't know, I just don't have access to them, they're ebooks or something. So I only have a couple that I will actually be holding up, but I will put them up on the screen for you to see as I talk about them. Now that is to say, all of these books are very subjective. If you love this book, that is totally fine. These are all my own personal opinions of why I didn't like these books and that they let me down based on my expectations for them. In fact, some of these are some very popular books and I just didn't vibe with them. So take it all with a pinch of salt. If you still like these books, then that's fine. If you still want to give them a go, of course, go for it. These are just my personal disappointing reads of 2022. So the first one is The Sad Ghost Club. So this is a graphic novel. It is a YA contemporary. The idea behind this is that we have this person who is a sad ghost and they have depression and anxiety, and that kind of turns you into a sad ghost, and they are living a very insular life because they feel like a sad ghost, and they go to a party and they meet someone else like them. It sounds like a really great idea, but unfortunately I felt like the first volume didn't really do what it was supposed to be doing. So the first volume is like 100 and something pages, I'm not really sure, but it's only really one conversation between these two sad ghosts, and that's kind of it. Nothing really happens, there's not much discussion of anything else, and also the conversations felt very forced and fabricated in a way that like teenagers wouldn't speak like that. So for me, I just felt like they had an idea and they did it very directly and did a lot of telling and not showing, and it wasn't nuanced at all. It was very much like shoving down your throat that you are not alone, other people are sad ghosts. I felt like it could have been done in a way that was a bit more subtle, and had more substance to it. The second volume was better, and I felt like volume 1 and 2 should have been combined into one book, because volume 1 honestly doesn't really do anything. It felt kind of like someone had written a half a page about what it is to have depression as a teenager and then put some ghosts around it. I don't know. So yeah, it was a disappointment for me, but I bet it's probably meaningful to a lot of other people. Just gonna adjust my camera because it feels like the setting, I think I moved after I set this up and now I feel like it's not right. That feels a bit more comfortable. I felt like I was like in the previous one, so we'll move it. The next one on my list is Nevermore, The Trials of Morrigan Crow by Jessica Townsend. This is a middle grade fantasy. It's about Morrigan Crow, who is destined to die on her 11th birthday, but just before she does die, she is whisked away to this other world. There she is invited to try out to become part of the Wondrous Society and stay in this world and save her life. It sounds like a great idea, but personally I didn't think it was very well executed. I thought the pacing was really, really off. So we spent a lot of time in the fluff between the actual trials that she has to do, and the trials themselves were like a chapter long at most. I really wanted to see more of the trials. I wanted to see more tension, I wanted to see more drama. We got a lot of fluff, sleepovers, conversation. I thought the twist was very, very obvious. And I just felt like the plot wasn't original enough for me. The world was incredibly original and I loved that, but the plot itself I feel like I have seen done over and over again, but better. So for me this was a real letdown and I won't be continuing the series, and I thought this was going to be a 5-star read for me. Next is You've Reached Sam by Dustin Thau. So this one is a YA contemporary. It is about a girl whose boyfriend dies very suddenly in an accident, and she's really struggling to deal with his death, and she decides to call his phone and discovers that he picks up, and she has this kind of connection with him in the afterlife on the phone. And it is about her grief and about letting go. Now, I really wanted to like this one. I really had high expectations because it's really hyped on TikTok. But for me, it again just fell a bit flat. Not a lot happens. It felt very slow, and I felt like outside of our female main character, everyone else was kind of irrelevant. Like, she has this group of friends, but they like appear at the beginning of the book to give her some advice, appear at the end of the book to give her some more advice, and in the middle they're just kind of not present. Like, all the other characters just kind of come and go as they are useful to her character rather than being their own characters. And I felt like her journey, whilst it was good and it was interesting, I felt like it could have been written better. It's one of those books that I feel like the idea is amazing, but I feel like maybe the writer wasn't ready to write the story yet, and with a few more years of like writing experience they might have been ready. But I just found it kind of boring, and I didn't really like the story at all. I found the ending very unsatisfying, and the fact that we don't get a lot explained about this connection was really disappointing, because it's such a big part of the book of why are we connected, why can we still talk, and then to have that not be properly explored by the end was really disappointing. So yeah, again, it's one that I thought I would love and I just didn't. Then we have Perfectly Preventable Deaths. This is a YA fantasy, I guess, but unfortunately I can't really tell you what it's about because I don't really know what it's about. I vaguely remember it being about two sisters who move in with their stepfather, with their mother as well, and they live in this village where there's kind of magical creatures around, and I think girls have been going missing. I'm not really sure. It's one of those books where, again, nothing really happens. I listened to the audiobook and I felt like I had listened to the introduction for the whole time I was listening to the book. Like, this whole book felt like an introductory chapter to the next book. I haven't read book 2. I imagine it's better because the summary of it makes it sound like it actually has a plot. But this book I just found very dry, very slow, and ultimately I just didn't understand the point. Number 6 is The Bride Test by Helen Hoang. Now, this will surprise people because when I read The Kiss Quotient, that was on one of my top books of the year that I read it. And now The Bride Test, its sequel, or the second book in the trilogy, is on my worst books of 2022. Now, this is an adult contemporary romance, and it is a second in the Kiss Quotient series. They're all kind of loosely connected to each other, where the main characters of each book loosely know each other, but you don't have to have read the previous books to read the next one. This one is about Kai, who is autistic, and he has never had a relationship because he doesn't believe that he can fall in love. And his family kind of see that he's never had a relationship, and they decide to get him like an arranged marriage from, I think it's Vietnam, where they're from. And so they get a lady from Vietnam and bring her over and tell her that they want her to seduce him, and they basically will like pay for her education and stuff if she does it. And oh my god, was this book problematic. I loved the autism rep. I thought the autism rep was really good. Helen Hoang does amazing autism rep, but the way everyone in this book treats Kai, and the fact that it's never painted as wrong and they're never kind of held accountable for it, is really concerning. Everyone in this book, they don't really care about Kai's feelings until it impacts the woman that they've brought over. I think her name is Esme. And until it impacts Esme, they don't care. They just don't care. Like, they never ask him why he's never had a relationship. They just kind of assume he's never bothered. And it just, they don't care about his well-being until it impacts Esme. And that was really bad. Like, they never ask him, like, why doesn't he have a relationship? Why doesn't he feel like he can love people? And how is he dealing with the grief that he's dealing with because he's lost a friend? They literally just don't even try to help him until it impacts the girl. And the girl in the book, the female main character, at one point she is told that Kai is autistic, and her literal like internal monologue is like, I don't know what that means. And what frustrates me is she then never tries to learn what that means, learns how she can interact with Kai, considering she is living with him, meant to be seducing him. If you were told something about the person you were living with and seducing, would you not then try and make sure you understand that piece of information about them? Apparently not. Even though she is going to school, she is clearly educated, she is clearly intelligent, she clearly has a willingness to learn, but not about that thing. And that's never painted as an issue. So ultimately, I feel like I understand that this happens in the real world, but I feel like in this format of a book, because we're supposed to believe it's happily ever after, those things should have been addressed, but instead we're supposed to think it's okay because it's a romance novel. They end up together at the end. I was not a fan. Then we have Hook, Line and Sinker by Tessa Bailey. Now, I normally love Tessa Bailey. Her books often end up in my top books of the year, and I usually really enjoy them, but Hook, Line and Sinker really fell flat for me. This is an adult contemporary romance. In this one, we have Fox and Hannah, who we met in the previous book, It Happened One Summer, and you do kind of need to read their book to understand this book for context. And so Hannah is working for a film production company, and she manages to convince them to film their next movie in the town that her sister moves to in the first book, and that is where Fox lives. And she then ends up staying with Fox while she's working on this movie. They've had this kind of tenuous friendship that definitely feels like more, and now that they're living together, will it like evolve into something more? The problem with this book is Hannah is obsessed with the fact that she's not a leading lady and wants to become a leading lady, and yet in this book she is definitely not a leading lady. She has very little character growth. Very little of the book is actually about her, and almost everything is centered around Fox. Now, I found Fox's growth and his story very interesting. The story behind Fox is that he's always been over-sexualized as a teenager and as a young adult, to the point that he kind of is only expected to behave in an overtly sexual way and has never been truly respected. And I think that's a really interesting thing to look at and deal with in a book, because I don't feel like that is talked about enough. But then Hannah just doesn't get much. Like, she really doesn't get much, and I found that really disappointing. The sex scenes were also really awkward in this book. Normally I find Tessa Bailey's sex scenes good, but I'm not down with all of the public stuff that she makes them do. But this one, like, even the private stuff was just a bit weird. It felt insta-lovey, even though it isn't insta-love, it is friends to lovers. So it just felt not quite right for me. Then we have Artemis by Andy Weir, and now I love Project Hail Mary and The Martian, also by Andy Weir, but this one was not very good. This one is about a base on the moon, and it is about a heist. It has a female main character, Jazz, who is kind of a transporter on the moon, and she does a lot of smuggling to make extra income, and she is asked to complete this crime, and she has to kind of perfect the crime so that she will not get caught, and it will change the shape of the economy on the moon. It sounds so good, but every single character in this book was incredibly unlikable. I think he was trying to make like the female version of his sassy male characters in his books, but it didn't work. He gave her no redeeming qualities. Like, she's not funny, she's not kind, and she just is annoying, and I hated her. And the only other female character in this book was evil. And I hated her too. And then all of the male characters were also pretty unlikable, to be fair. It wasn't just the female characters, but it was especially frustrating that you could tell he was trying to recreate the humour and the dark wit of his male main characters in other books, but with his female character, he decided to give her nothing positive to balance that out, and ultimately made her very unlikable. And because I didn't like any of the characters, I felt no tension around the plot, and I just found it kind of boring. It's weird, because in The Martian and Project Hail Mary, all the sciencey stuff, which is very accurate, is really interesting, but in this book it felt really boring. It just felt like someone else had written this book. Honestly, it was just a bit of a flop for me. It just felt like it wasn't the same author. Then we have The Ex-Hex by Erin Sterling, and I feel like even though this is massively hyped on TikTok, a lot of people are now saying that they also think it's awful, and I thought it was awful. I gave this 2 stars. So this is an adult romance. It's kind of a fantasy romance, but honestly feels more contemporary at times. It is about a girl who, at the beginning of the book, she's at this magical university, and her boyfriend, who she'd been having like a summer fling with, breaks up with her and goes back to Wales. And that night she kind of drunkenly places a curse on him, and then I think it's 10 years later he returns and the curse is enacted. Between them they have to try and lift this curse on the town. It sounds fun, it sounds great, but it was poorly executed. The fantasy plotline, what? The world building, what? Like, I think the problem is when you have someone who is clearly meant to be a romance writer trying to write fantasy, if they haven't done enough research and read enough other fantasy books, the world building and the plot can be a bit lacking, and that's what happened here. I felt like maybe with some more time, if she read some more fantasy books, read some more diversely, to support her writing. That might have helped. I don't know if she's not read a lot of fantasy books, but it felt like she hadn't, because there was no real world building here, no real explanation of the magic system, and the fantasy plotline just felt kind of weird. It felt like you could swap out magic for something else contemporary and it wouldn't change the story. Like it felt like it was just magic for the fun of it rather than actually being integral to the plot. The romance was also horrific. Like, it was so cringy, so insta-lovey, and I just couldn't get behind it. Like, they had this big breakup and then like 10 years later see each other again and magically they're like instantly attracted to each other. Like, no, I'm not buying that. It just felt really cringy and really awkward and I hated it. Another book for this list is Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. This one, I've read a mixture of physical and audiobook and honestly both were bad. I don't understand why people like this book. And people talk about a plot twist as if, was it not obvious to everyone all along what this book was about? I'm not going to spoil it, but like, how was that a plot twist? Like, it was glaringly obvious to me from the beginning of the book what was happening. And yet people are saying it's got an amazing plot twist. And I went into it thinking there was an amazing plot twist and it wasn't. So that was that. Also, just boring. Really boring. The characters felt very two-dimensional. I didn't care about Piranesi. It was fine, but it felt like nothing happened, nothing was resolved. I didn't really get the point of the book. Yeah, didn't like it. And then my final one on this list is Sadie. I have been wanting to read this book since I first joined the bookish internet. It was all over the bookish internet when I first joined like book Twitter, and everyone was raving about it. Everyone was going on about how amazing it was, and I don't get it. So this one is about Sadie, and she was raising her younger sister Mattie because their parents were absent, and then one day Mattie turns up dead and Sadie then goes on a mission to find out what happened to Mattie. And that's one of the storylines, and then the other storyline we follow is a podcaster who is making a podcast about Sadie and what happened to her, and he's trying to track her down because she's since gone missing. It was again, I felt like it was really obvious what had happened. At least to Mattie, I felt like it was obvious what happened. And the ending of this book was one of the most unsatisfying endings I have ever read. And I just remember finishing the audiobook and going, no, that's not the end. That's not the end. It can't be the end. And I just, it was so frustrating. I thought it was an interesting idea. I think this is one where this type of story maybe isn't for me with that kind of ending and the predictability of it. I don't think it's necessarily an objectively bad book, but I had a really bad time reading it because I just felt like it was obvious and I didn't get why we were doing all the fluff beforehand. I also didn't really get the point of the podcast section because a lot of the time we would get Sadie's perspective first and then we would get the podcaster talking about what happened afterwards, but obviously they don't have all the information that Sadie had because she was actually there and she's narrating it herself. So then it felt like we were getting the full version followed by the incomplete version. It felt like the wrong way round, so it kind of made the podcast side irrelevant. So those were 10 of my disappointing / worst books of 2022. As I said earlier, if you like them or if you still want to read them, that's totally fine. These are my personal opinions, and honestly when you read 130 books in a year you're going to have some that you don't like, and that's totally fine. This year I'm getting a lot better at DNFing. I've already DNF'd a couple where I started it and I was like, what am I reading? I don't like this. So that is my mission for this year, is to have less books on my worst reads list because I'm DNFing more. So thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, please give it a like and consider subscribing to see more content from me. All of my social media links are in the description below. If you'd like to leave me a comment to let me know you are here, leave me a magnifying glass emoji in the comments below. Thank you, bye.